right, next I would like to introduce Deborah Coppell, who is a senior social worker here at Perlmutter Cancer Center, and she's part of the Supportive Services Program, and she's going to talk to us about the services they offer and also introduce our patient survivor speaker. Please welcome Deborah. You need a water, help yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. So, obviously, coping with a cancer diagnosis can be a very daunting experience. As an oncology social worker and a member of the melanoma team, my role is to focus on the patient's emotional well-being by helping that individual who is dealing with cancer to improve his or her quality of life, manage anxiety and fear, and find hope. I provide counseling to patients and their families to assist them in accepting new roles and responsibilities. I serve as a liaison to the medical team and connect patients to the resources they need to better negotiate the healthcare system. I also help patients to access the support they need, whether it's emotional support or concrete services. Support can take the form of referral to community resources, accessing legal help, encouraging participation in a support group, or helping the patient to access complementary therapies. As a member of the team, I work with the other medical professionals on the team to help patients get the information they need to make informed choices about their care. I also help to bolster the patient's supports so that he or she is better able to manage the day-to-day challenges of living with cancer. And finally, my role is to validate the patient and to ensure that the patient and family feel listened to and emotionally supported. That being said, I'd like to introduce one of the patients who will share his story. Let's welcome Keith McLaughlin.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. And I'd like to thank Dr. Pavlik and the Molly Fund for helping put this day together. In 2007, I was shaving one day, and I had a small lump on the side of my face on my cheek. And typically, just shave. If I nick something, I figured it was a pimple or an ingrown hair. You try to squeeze it and get it out. And this time, nothing would come out. So I went to the dermatologist a few days later, and he felt it was some type of cyst. He cut it out. About a week later, he called me up and told me that it was melanoma and that he felt it was a very strong strain and I needed to get help immediately. So he gave me a referral to an oncologist who I went to go see, and I went for a PET scan. And after the PET scan, I went to a hospital in the city with the scan and was told that I was stage 4, and I had roughly about 10 other tumors throughout my body, in my lungs, my bones, other soft tissue, adrenal gland, and they said that I needed to get some type of treatment immediately. This hospital I went to it wasn't NYU. They told me that there's very few treatments in the tri-state area that deal with stage 4 metastatic melanoma at that time, and that they don't deal with it anymore. They didn't have good results. They didn't have a really good calling for it, and they gave me a couple referrals. So from there, I had to go find some more help. I was able to get into another hospital with another very good doctor that had a very long history with dealing with melanoma and research. And I did a treatment called IL-2, which was, I'm forgetting its name, interleukin. And interleukin, as Dr. Pavlik said, is one of 2 treatments that was only really around at that point. And it's an immune therapy, which is better than a chemotherapy. Instead of chemotherapy, which kills off good cells and bad cells, this immune therapy basically just goes after to boost the immune system to kill off the bad cells. But it's a very strong treatment. What you have to do is you have to go into a hospital for 5 to 6 days solid. And over the course of the 5 to 6 days, they give you 14 treatments. You get a treatment every 8 hours around the clock. And there's a lot of side effects when you're in the hospital. Sometimes you can't get all 14 into you, depending on how your heart is dealing with it, how your kidneys are dealing with it. It's a very heavy-duty treatment. After a week of that, you go home, you rest, and then you come back the following week, and they try to get another 14 rounds into you. So after doing that, I waited several weeks, did another PET scan, and I was told that it helped, but it didn't do what it should have done. I was still not in the greatest shape. So the doctor said, one of the things we can do is we can try to find something else now, or what we could do is wait about another month, and you could repeat the interleukin again. You could come in for another week, go home for another week, and then come back in. So being that there were really no, alternatives, I decided to do that. So I had to repeat this again, which at this point, it was very long days, a lot of bad side effects. But after the second round, it did seem to help more. But again, I wasn't out of the woods. I still had tumors. Some disappeared, some shrunk. 1 or 2 new ones appeared, because sometimes with treatment, when you have scans and it shows disease, and you do treatment, sometimes what happens is the treatment, you have other tumors that are small. They're too small to detect. Now that they're inflamed, they become detectable, and you think you've gotten worse, but sometimes you're not actually worse, because the tumor is now fighting the disease. But after that, I had a couple of tumors that were just way too big that the treatment really couldn't handle. I had, as I mentioned, I had it in the bone in my elbow, and it was in the tissue and in the bone, and it was pressing on the nerves. So at this point, I started to need surgeries. So I had to go in, and I had to find a specialist to have the bone in my elbow cut out, and the tissue cut out, and my elbow reconstructed to save my arm, because it came to the point that they were wondering if my arm, depending on the amount of bone and tissue they took out, was unsavable. So I had this surgery. It wound up, I was able to save my arm, but I still had more tumors inside me, and I already did the interleukin, and it was basically a dead end for me now. But there was a new treatment, which wasn't a treatment yet. It was a clinical trial called the ipilimumab, which was up there. It's another immune treatment that became a full-fledged treatment in 2012, I believe. So again, there wasn't many hospitals in the area that did it, so I wound up going to Yale, New Haven in Connecticut. I live on Long Island, so it wasn't really convenient, but you do what you have to do. So this treatment is also, it has a regimen. You have to do 4 treatments, one every couple of weeks, and then you would go on a maintenance program for up to 2 years. During the point after the initial start of it, I had a reaction which was good, and then during the maintenance program, it really wasn't effective. I was getting some new tumors. Old tumors weren't shrinking anymore, and the doctors up there felt that it wasn't worth keeping me on it, so I needed to then find again somewhere else to go. So I wound up coming back here to New York, and also I was given a referral to the National Cancer Institute, so now I was driving to Bethesda, Maryland to try to get some help there. And then the doctor who started me on the interleukin contacted me and told me that she was now doing the ipilimumab, and that she got permission to give it to me on a compassion basis. So I started doing that, and normally you do one every 3 months, and since I had, at this point, probably 12 or 14 nodules, tumors still throughout my body, I was doing it every 2 months to try to boost my immune system even more. But it did work for some, and then what happened is I wound up having other tumors that were too big. At that point, I had one that was in my adrenal gland, and this is now in 2009, 2 years later, that I had some nodules and tumors that were the size of peas to the one in my adrenal gland that grew to the size of a baseball. And it had to come out because it was kind of collapsed over my kidney. It was pressing into my liver, and it also tapped into the vein that runs down the right side of your body that controls the blood flow to the right side of your body. Cancer tumors love blood flow. It's kind of like kids on candy. The more it gets, the more it loves it. So I had to have that taken out. And so I had to find a surgeon that was willing to do it because the surgeons that I was dealing with that did the arm couldn't do this. And the referral that he gave me told me that he felt it was unsafe and would give me a less than a 50% survival rate of the surgery. So I finally found a surgeon that was good and told me that he'd be able to probably do the surgery, but same thing, he gives me about less than a 50% chance. Because after he described the surgery and describing how they would have to get the tumor off the vein and reconstruct the vein, that I could bleed out during the surgery, and that would be the end of that. So I had the surgery. Obviously, I survived it, and at that point, I still stayed on the IPI maintenance, and with the surgeon that I have now met and the doctor that was giving me the treatment on the compassion basis, I decided that some of these tumors were just too big and that the treatment wasn't enough for it. So we decided to do surgeries. I would do a treatment, and then I would do a couple of surgeries in between the 2 months. I do 2, 3, 4 tumors within a 2-month period just to get them out. So during the course of doing this and being on the maintenance program, I had roughly about 13 tumors removed, and then I was down to 1, and well, actually I was down to 2, because then what happened is when I was originally up in Connecticut and I was on the IPI, and it was a clinical trial. Clinical trials sometimes are very strict. You're not allowed to do certain other things. You're not allowed to do radiation. You're not allowed to take other medicines. So I wasn't able to do radiation, and we discovered that the tumor in the bone in my arm was growing back. So I had to basically just see what happens. So it grew back to its normal size that it was. It was the size of probably a golf ball. And again, I already had, damage from the loss of bone, the loss of muscle. And they said that they needed to go in and do it again. And at this point, they can't guarantee keeping my arm. So I had to go in and do this other kind of radical surgery to try to save my arm, which I was able to save, but I wound up receiving a lot of nerve damage in my hand and my arm. And then I had to do a bunch of other surgeries to get reconstruction on my hand and arm and nerve reconstruction. But it wound up working out. So now I was down to 1 tumor, and the doctor that I had that I was doing the IPI with, the hospital that she was affiliated with, was deciding they were cutting down on their melanoma research and programs. And again, now I had to find another place to go. So this was in 2010. So over the course of the 3 years, there was a lot of surgeries, a lot of different treatments, a lot of running around. It kind of was very hectic, but in the long run, it really, compared to some people I've met that were dealing with melanoma and other diseases, it really wasn't that bad, because I had a very good support system. I had people doing research. I was doing research. I was willing to do whatever I had to do. I was willing to travel. And it wound up, it was, like I said, good days and bad days. It really worked out somewhat well. But in 2010, I wound up seeing an article about Molly Fund doing another seminar at Hofstra University. So I figured I got to find somewhere to go. And I didn't know anything about Dr. Pavlik. I didn't really know anything about NYU with melanoma. I was hitting all the other general hospitals in New York City that had stuff going on with melanoma. And I met Dr. Pavlik, and I sat on a seminar, and I then made an appointment and wound up getting in with Dr. Pavlik and going over all my records and everything I've done, and she decided that I could probably do what's called a restart on the IPI. And what that is basically I go through the initial phases again. I start with the initial 4 treatments, which are much more heavier than the maintenance ones. And now that I would have less disease in me, that would probably be more effective. So we wound up doing that, and it was effective, that the one tumor I had, which was still somewhat large, remained basically the same size, and I had no new disease. So then we stayed with this program till about 2012, when IPI became an FDA-approved treatment. And at that point, I could have the last tumor removed. You can't be on a clinical trial without having disease, which, I understand. Back then I was like, this makes no sense. But, you can't be on a cancer drug unless you have cancer. So I wound up, as soon as she told me I could have it taken out, I had the last tumor taken out, and I continued with the maintenance program for about 1.5 years. And since 2013, I've been cancer-free. But again, I'd like to thank, NYU and Dr. Pavlik for all that they've done, and her staff. Her staff has been amazing. They're a real support system. They really take what's going on with you personal, and they get involved because it's not just a job, it's not just a career, it's something more within them, that they feel that this is something that they need to do for people, and that I just don't know how to say it. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. So thank you for your time, and good luck.